Welcome to the AIOps Evolution Weekly podcast. In this week's episode, Bill and I talk about the essential aspects of finding the right partner for your AIOps implementation. We walk you through what you should look for regarding experience, fit, integration of systems, and operational experience. Join us as we talk through common concerns and how to find the right match for your AIOps journey. Enjoy the episode. Welcome, everybody, to the AIOps Evolution Weekly podcast. I'm your host, Sean McDermott, and my co-host, Bill Driscoll. Bill, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Sean?
I'm doing good. So this week, I've got a lot of questions from people, right? And from how do you do an implementation, vision, roadmap, all the things we've been talking about. And one of the questions that come up a lot is, a lot of the companies that are trying to get into AIOps and starting to look at it don't really have the experience, right? So they're looking for outside partners to help them. So I thought today we would focus on, how to find the right partner and right strategic partner. And, there's kind of 4 areas that I've thought about regarding, finding the right partner. And I thought we'd go through each one of these. What do you think?
Yep, that sounds good.
Good.
I'm glad you sent them to me ahead of time, so we can talk through them.
Good. One of the first things I think about when it comes to finding a partner is really, what do you want this partner to do? And you tie it back to your vision, you tie it back to your plan of what you're trying to do and what you've been communicating and the ROI and the investments. So what I would be looking for a partner is finding a partner that's aligned to the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So when you start thinking about business outcomes, what do you mean by people say, what do you mean by that? And it's like, okay, so does your partner really understand your end state vision of where you're trying to go? Because a partner, you can look at a partner in a couple of ways. That you can look at it as a just pure, fingers on the keyboard, or you can look at them as a pure kind of, hey, this is concept, but they don't do implementation. My suggestion is to find a partner that kind of sits in the middle, that has the ability to look out over the next couple of years, really aligned to your vision. Maybe they've even helped you in developing your vision along the way, but actually have the expertise to do the implementation. Because, early in my career, before I started Windward Consulting, I worked for a very large, very prestigious consulting firm, and we did a lot of strategy advisory work. And what was really concerning to me was that we were recommending some early on, technologies, but we had actually never implemented any of them because we didn't have implementation staff. We were more strategy advisors. And that's really one of the reasons why I started Windward in the first place, is because I wanted to build a company that could help, look at strategy as well as have all the implementation. Because without the implementation expertise, I think your strategy is flawed. And I couldn't build that at the company I was at, so I started Windward, and that still holds today. I think you need to be looking at what are your partner needs to understand your vision. They need to buy into your vision. They need to enhance your vision of what you're trying to do. They need to understand the stakeholders that you're trying to get to, and what you're trying to deliver to the stakeholders, and what outcomes you're looking for. And they need to be able to do that in kind of a real world way. In fact, our tagline at Windward used to be, strategic thinking, real world results. And what I meant by that was, we want to be able to tie into the long-term vision, but understand that implementation of technology doesn't always necessarily run along the same line and doesn't necessarily align all the time to your vision. And you're going to have to make changes because every product has strengths and weaknesses, and you've got to work around those in order to achieve your vision. So the first thing is your partner really needs to be focused on business outcomes. I wouldn't focus too much on tools at this point. I mean, if you selected a tool or some technology, obviously you need to find a partner with experience in that. But again, I would be more focused on the data and, what data you're trying to consume, what are the sources of the data. I think that's one of the challenges that you find in consulting companies out there, is that they tend to be kind of single one-trick ponies. They're aligned to this company, and the reality is in the AIOps world, and I think in general operations world, having a more agnostic approach and understanding data sources and understanding the source systems that are generating that data is probably more important than the actual tool itself. right? And the analogy I had to that is back in the days of when we were doing a lot of remedy work. ServiceNow came along, and ServiceNow had a different architecture, and it was more Java based and SaaS based. But in general, the concepts, 90% of the concepts were exactly the same. So we were able to make that transition. It's kind of like if you're a driver for Porsche and you decide to leave Porsche and now you're going to drive for Ferrari. All that experience of driving a Porsche is going to help you, and you're going to make some changes to driving a Ferrari, but it's not going to be really that problematic. And I think any partner that's got a lot of experience in deploying AIOps is going to be able to move between those tools. So you really want to think about, do they have the experience with the data and the source systems for that? Mm-hmm. So, and I think the last point I wanted to make on this is, I think partners need to be what I call OCM ready, and make sure that they're thinking about, operational change management from the concept of, okay, we're going to be deploying this. And we've talked about this a lot on this podcast. We're going to be deploying AIOps, and it's going to change our tooling. It's going to change how we make decisions. It's going to change our processes. It's going to change how teams work together. And that, that type of organizational change can really make or break a project. So, engaging with a partner that really understands how to operationalize these systems day to day, how to do training, how to do enablement of teams, and how to help them, really get onto the platform and buy into it, I think is key. So that's kind of my first point around, getting a partner focused on, your desired outcomes.
Yep, makes sense. Yeah, and I'd see, I think the second point, I'll kind of transition to that, is being vendor agnostic, right? And having a partner that isn't just locked into one particular technology or one group of technologies. And I think there's a lot of consulting firms or partners out there that they built up services around one particular vendor. And I think you really need, like you just said, Sean, that you got to bring in a partner that has experience implementing tools in that space and has a good experience with some of these tools. But I think especially if you're in the strategy, the selection, the planning forward, and kind of pre-lock into a technology, you really want to make sure you're partnering with someone who's vendor agnostic and isn't just pushing one particular product or technology. I think as I look at most enterprises, and I think people who work in these enterprises will identify with this, there's a whole spectrum. And I think on the one extreme, I'll just use AT&T. They're a pretty big company that pretty much builds a architecture and reference architecture and tells their vendors, you need to fit into our architecture. And they're big enough that they can tell the vendors, no, you're going to add this feature and this feature and this feature, and you're going to get rid of this part of the product, and you're going to fit into our architecture. That's what we're doing. It's completely driven by their business outcomes, completely driven by what they want to accomplish. And they're sort of trying to influence the market and say, you work with us, you fit within our architecture, or you don't. There's other companies that get complete vendor lock-in and say, we're an HP shop, an IBM shop, a ServiceNow shop, a CA shop, a Splunk shop, and they just say, we're going to get behind the features and functionality of that vendor. I think most companies are in between, and I think that just gets back to you're going to really pick some best of breed, or maybe you have one or two key partners you work with, or not partners, but technologies, but you got to fill in the gaps as you evolve your technology, as you evolve your infrastructure, and you've got to be able to fill in the holes to get maybe specific types of data, add certain types of correlations, bring in certain types of workflows, drive certain types of automation. And that's really where you're going to have a best of breed kind of mix of vendors that you need to look at. And I think a partner that's vendor agnostic is going to be constantly looking out at the market and saying, here's really the 3 or 4 you should look at. Now let's look at your environment, look at your maturity, look at the gaps that you have, the overlaps that you have, and what is the right fit for you, versus just pushing you in the direction that they're trying to sell or resell or partner with.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting. I think that's a good point. And we've always been vendor agnostic here at Windward, and the philosophy behind that is, our customers are vendor agnostic, right? They buy products from everybody, whether it's from CA, which I like Broadcom now, HP, IBM,
It's Micro Focus, right?
Micro Focus. Yeah, everyone's been. I mean, you be in this business long enough, you'll see all the consolidation happening, and it's kind of this ebb and flow of consolidation. And the reality is that most of the companies that we work with have a lot of legacy applications and tools, and again, they're kicking off a lot of data. And
Mhm.
company, partners that are more agnostic and understand that are, I think, in a better position, especially primarily in this AI ops world, right? If you're obviously if you're saying, "Hey, I need a specific ServiceNow application built," then yeah, you could
You
go
want to,
hire a ServiceNow partner to do that. That would make sense. But right now, AI ops is just so distributed, and the whole point of it is to consume lots of data from lots of different sources. And companies, partners that understand those data sources are going to be key. So the point that I wanted to also bring up, and I get this question a lot, and we get this question a lot on pretty much every proposal we ever do, and that is price, right? So what's the right price to pay, or how do you make a decision based on price? And I think that the first thing to understand, I think, when it comes to pricing is the spectrum of consulting or implementation partners. And on one side of the spectrum, you have very strategic advisory type consultants that really don't have any implementation ability. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have body shops that basically just really just got staff augmentation and coding and things like that. And where I think there's a place for both, but in this world of AI ops, I think you really need to find somebody in the middle, right? Somebody who's got several years of who has got all the management experience and visionary experience, kind of look out into the market and say, okay, this is where we're going. Like you said, what are the 4 top platforms? And those platforms may change. Those 4 options may change from company to company based on the context of the company. So again, having a consultant that understands the context of your business is really important, and but then has the implementation expertise. So I think that's the key to understand where you're going to fall on the spectrum. If you've got the architectural data scientist experience, you may want to look at a partner on the implementation end of that spectrum, and that probably will be cheaper for you. If you really are just starting and you're trying to figure this out and you don't have people that understand AI ops or the introduction of machine learning into your operations environment, you might want to start on the higher end, right? And look at more strategic in helping build out that vision and then move through that spectrum. And you actually might move through that spectrum over time, right? As you gain more experience in implementation of these technologies, you might feel more comfortable that you're growing your internal team and that you can start using companies on the lower end of the spectrum in the staff augmentation. So I think that's the key, is trying to understand where do you fit in that, and that's going to drive price. And I think the other thing is you have to ask yourself a question: is any price worth it if you don't achieve your results, right? So is free even worth it if you don't achieve your results? And I would
nope.
contend no, right? Because if if you're not achieving what you want, it doesn't matter what kind of money you spent. It could be $1 or $1,000,000. If you don't achieve your results, then it just wasn't a good use of money. So going back to the idea of making sure that you working with partners that understand the outcomes and results that you're trying to get to. And what I have found in this area right now, in this state of AI ops and machine learning, is that most companies really need a partner that understands what are the outcomes and can build to that. Because if you get into the lower end, you may not have enough expertise to articulate the business outcomes and what you're trying to get to, and they don't have really the ability to articulate business outcomes into technical requirements. So, uh, and that's you're gonna pay somewhere in the middle, all right, of the pack. So, and I think when you start looking at some of these large, so then you say, okay, what kind of firms can I look at? Do I look at a large firm? Do I look at a medium-sized firm? Do I look at a small firm? My opinion on that is, again, depends on where you're at, right? Are you in where is your expertise level at? What's the size of your company? If you're a Fortune 500, one of the things that we hear all the time is, you never get fired for hiring Accenture, right? But the reality is that Accenture has to do larger deals, right? That they're such a big company right now that um, they're not designed to do smaller, say $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 deals. They're looking for multi-million-dollar deals. So they're actually focused on, large enterprise Fortune 500, and they can take these AIOps deals and make them, several $1 million engagements. I think that honestly, I don't know if we're in the right time frame for deployment of AIOps to warrant something like that. And if you're a smaller company, you're probably going to not have as much budget, so you're probably going to work with more of a smaller, mid-size consulting firm. So that you kind of have to kind of weigh those things together, and ultimately, think, okay, it's kind of like what when my kids were looking for college, right? And they I talked to a friend of mine who's a dean of admissions at a pretty big university, and he said, "Look, when you go out on your college tours, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find the right type of college that you want to apply to, because in the end, you don't want to apply to a Penn State and then a Swarthmore, which is a very very small liberal arts school, and then apply to NYU, which is in the middle of a city, right?" It's like you don't want to apply to all those schools. You want to basically find the environment, the curriculum, the location, the geography, urban, rural, size. You want to kind of get comfortable with that and then apply to schools like that in that criteria. Otherwise, you're going to have a very hard time trying to figure out, okay, do I go to Swarthmore or do I go to Alabama, which are like completely different experiences. And I feel like it's the same way when it comes to partners. You kind of have to figure out, okay, where are we at? With our expertise, what do we need, and how do we then narrow it down so we can go talk to 2 or 3 partners that might meet that criteria?
Right. No, I completely agree, and I think that I think just having that combination of strategy and operational kind of knowledge is critical. I think that you sort of it reminds me of waterfall methodologies versus agile, right? If you work with a bigger consulting company where they're going to kind of do big project, you're going to spend a lot of heavy dollar on strategy and spend a lot of time putting this big strategy together and then starting this big implementation, and spend money on that. And that's very waterfall thinking. I think when you work with that kind of in between partner that can help you with some selection, help you with kind of general strategy and direction, but also has the operational expertise, you can be more agile and do some experimentation, do some implementation, adjust the strategy, and you can they can be with you along that journey. And I think that sort of ties into the last piece was operational expertise, and he's tied on that in the beginning is, you definitely want a partner that can talk about what's the business outcome and doesn't just tease you with great technology, right? And really put the technology in the driver's seat. The driver's seat has to be continuously, why are we doing this? Are we getting any outcomes? Are we getting the benefit that we expected? Or are we getting other benefits maybe we didn't expect, but it's driving kind of revenue, it's driving risk reduction, it's driving real business benefit or cost reductions or real business benefits. But the last point we're making here is you need also the operational expertise. You need a partner that really understands the organizational roles and the impact it's going to have on how people do their jobs in your operation centers or in your engineering centers or your DevOps or your SREs. You need to understand how it's going to impact process, how the tools are going to integrate together, and how they should be best implemented. What's the best practice type of implementation? So you're not code heavy, or you have reuse, and you have the ability to do good design in how you implement or how you code or how you roll out different algorithms. And so having that operational expertise is critical as well, so that you can make those adjustments. You can kind of understand what the reality is of implementation versus just maybe ending up with a product that got implemented, but you didn't have the organization or the process ready for that. And so that operational expertise is really a combination of process, organizational change, and technology expertise.
Yeah, I think when it comes to, just to kind of follow on to your point, right? And I think it's very important. This is one thing that we tell our customers all the time is that you want to be sure that you're contracting with the company and not the individual person on the project. And I know that we're people and we form relationships with people
Mm-hmm.
and we say, oh, or we say, oh, I looked at that person's resume. I don't know. You have to trust the company that you're working with. And I feel that it's also very important that the company is sizable enough that you have reach back capability into that company so that they can address lots of things. And we've seen this so many times over the years that when you're looking at systems, especially monitoring systems that are taking in so much information and actually outputting information to different places, that understanding other systems, source data, target systems, building APIs, the integrations, and understanding the source and destination systems in and around your monitoring platform is really, really key. And if you're working with an organization that's kind of very focused on one particular technology platform, or they don't have a lot of staff, they're a pretty small company, you run the risk of saying, hey, we're having a problem integrating into Splunk, and we have to articulate to the Splunk team what they need to do in order to make the change and what we need to do to accept that data. And you have to be able to kind of understand how Splunk works to have that communication with that team. And that's where we see a lot of the smaller firms really not doing well, is because they don't have that, they don't understand the source system. So when there's a problem with data collection, they just say, hey, we got a problem with data collection, and they kind of put it onto the other team that's sourcing the data to them. Whereas the way we look at it, we see it as part of our obligation to actually get into the trenches with those other teams to help them through that issue we might be having with data, source data, field data, whatever it is, right? So, good.
I think
Any
that, I think
other?
that, yeah, I just say that those, it reminds me of the security commercial. I forget the company, but it was where their security people are chasing the thief and crosses over this line, and they go on the mic or whatever, and they say, the thief has left sector 7, we're all clear. It's like they just push the problem somewhere else. And I think in these projects, those in between points and integration points are so critical and so important. And a lot of times, projects may be organized to scope, piece 1 and 2 and piece 3, but they don't, we don't plan for and accommodate for planning for the work that really needs to happen in that integration point, and that both sides really have to get involved in the other side's data source, and then how are we actually using that data. And that typically takes longer and more, more challenging than maybe just implementing, your own sandbox. And so we definitely, when we scope, implementations or look at things that, how are we going to, how are we going to implement this, that integration work is really, ends up being a lot of times the most critical part of the project, and the one that requires the most time and focus, but also is where the real benefit is. So just wanted to
Oh
mention
yeah,
that and bring up.
I totally agree with that. I think that over the years, 25 years of doing this at Windward, the integrations of the systems ultimately are the most important, because
Mm-hmm.
One system provides value. It's a multiple factor, right? So 1 + 1 = 3, right? 1 + 1 + 1 = 5. So when you start integrating these things together, and that's where it really comes into play of working with a firm that understands the ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because everything's interconnected, and the ecosystem is made up of lots of different vendors. So
Yep.
good. Well, I think this was a good discussion. I hope we answered all the questions that I get. And I think the only last question is, how much does it cost? And the only thing I can say is it depends, right? I think that's a conversation you have with the vendors that you're talking to, and the partners that you're talking to. So, anyways, I think with that, I think we'll wrap it up. So, Bill, I appreciate you joining us again today. And I wanted to thank everybody for tuning in today. And I hope this was valuable. And we will be back next week.
Great.
Take care, everybody.
See you next week.